What do you say, everybody? Welcome to the Cubs Baseball Channel. Going to talk with Patrick Mooney from the Athletic. Before we do, though, let me ask you guys to join our roster, our all-star roster. We're looking for you to make this an all-star roster, and it's easy to do. It's free. Like, subscribe, and give us a thumbs up. And let me remind you that the Cubs Baseball Channel is presented by the Tennessee Smokies. They just won their first championship in 45 years, and the Smokies right now in the team store with some of that great championship swag. And I know Cubs fans like to look fresh when they're out on the streets. Well, you need to do that with the Smokies. And that's what we got going on right now. How about now? There you go. Now you can hear me. Well, what's up, brother? How you been?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Great to see you again. The wire here on my headphones spun the spun the microphone shut.
I think that Smokies team store ad just blew out my speakers or something.
Did it? Yeah, it's loud, right? It's loud. They said they wanted to sponsor my channel. I'm like, I'm not turning that down. I'm a seasonal guy, right? So
totally.
does that make me full time now? Let's bridge the gap. There's so much to talk about with the Cubs, and you cover the team every day, and you know you great stories on the Athletic. I'm a subscriber. I love to read the stuff that you guys do. This season, I mean, I got to start out with the negative. I mean, this season's a disappointment to me. They didn't make the playoffs. The way that things ended, you know, on this channel, a lot of people that are going to watch this are pointing the finger at David Ross. My take on it is that he's a great guy. You know him from being around the Cubs as a player. And then, you know, obviously when he was manager, I don't think you could find a better person. I appreciate the fact that this team played really hard, even when they were losing at the end. But throughout the season, they were 10 down and then they come fighting back. And that was really incredible. I would have traded, you know, everyone knows this. I would have traded at the deadline. And but I also enjoyed the run. Don't get me wrong. Like, it was great. But I would have traded at the deadline and built up, because I feel like if you end up where the Cubs ended up, and that's not making the playoffs, you just wasted, you know, the opportunity to get a lot better by taking advantage of the market itself. But the thing that I guess concerns me is some of the use of the bullpen, some of the in-game decisions, and the fact that the guy came from Dancing with the Stars and, you know, ESPN to manage. And I look at a lot of the other managers that are having success around baseball, and they did it in the minor leagues, or they did it as a coach, you know, after being a player, you know. So I feel like some of this stuff is part of the learning curve of just learning this job. And this is like legitimately the first playoff race that he's been in. And if he gets better next year, I mean, then it's all worth it, right? But that's kind of my take on David Ross and the way that things ended for the Cubs. What was yours?
Well, let's look at the stakeholders here, right? I mean, the owner of the team says he's our guy. He did a great job. The team president who helped hire him raves about almost everything he does, while allowing for some room for disagreement in terms of in-game decisions. And then the biggest names in the clubhouse all have his back. And Mick, you know how those clubhouses operate. I mean, you have a lot of feel, and I think that is where David Ross is exceptional. I think pulling them out from 10 games under, I think, is a very strong sign of his leadership skills. To me, I think a lot of the in-game stuff is a little overblown, to be honest. Like, I don't think the roster that was handed to him was some sort of like World Series contender. I don't think they squandered a championship season, but like, no doubt when the margins are like this razor thin, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable questions being asked of like, what happened, what could have been done differently, what should happen in the future. And it's crazy to think, like, if the Cubs win one more game and are in the playoffs, we're not having this conversation.
Right.
But they didn't win that game, and they lost so many agonizing close games in the last, say, 3 weeks of September after their playoff odds had soared above 90%. That, yeah, I mean, Jed Hoyer said it. This is going to be a really big year for everyone next year, but certainly the manager. He's not a rookie manager anymore. He's going into year 5 in the job. And I think what I will say about David Ross, that he is open to that type of feedback. He is not, an arrogant, stuck in his ways type of leader. Like, he very much has all these conversations internally. And I do think some of these decisions, it's hard to like separate the front office from the coaching staff, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. Look, I respect David Ross and the players and the fact that they have backed him, and they should. I mean, he's one of their guys, and he's been a player's manager. But I guess my question is, accountability. If it's not on him, then who's it on? Because this, to me, should have been a playoff team. I just think they were better than Miami. If they beat Arizona at all, besides the one game that they won, if they win 2 more of those games, we're not talking about this right now. And to me, it's like, okay, well, I know it was only one game, but it was one game that kept you out of the playoffs. And to me, that's the bar that you set for yourself, and you didn't reach that. And that's a bar that we haven't seen reached here lately.
Yeah, I think this is not, really my opinion as much as trying to understand it from, let's start at the top with ownership, right? I mean,
Right.
Tom Ricketts, how he thinks about things. And I think stability and sustainability are very important to him, and how you get there, we can disagree on that. But I mean, generally speaking, this is a pretty patient organization that prioritizes the long term, the longer horizon over like kind of playing the blame game immediately. And I think that accountability that you speak of will come in the form of heightened pressure, heightened expectations for next season. I think it'll be interesting to see what some of these exit interviews yield in terms of, how do they shape the coaching staff? Do some of the processes change? Are we going to see a little more load management with certain players? I think you have to look at too, like, just some of the ways a bullpen can be constructed. And like, sure, it's great. Like, you never want to overpay, for some of these like not closer type relievers, who get the deals at the winter meetings. Are like, oh man, how can you believe, that guy got that contract? And it's like, well, sometimes you have to pay for experience, and sometimes you have to pay for the know-how. And I think clearly, to me, I mean, the bullpen, Jed himself said, like, I didn't give Ross a lot to work with at the beginning of the season. They found a great formula there for the bulk of the season. And then the guys just ran out of gas at the end, at a time when your opening day starter was dealing with multiple issues. And, there are broader trends in the game that I'm curious to see how the Cubs adapt. I mean, you and I have talked about this, of like these 5-inning starting pitchers, it's like 2 times through the lineup and gone. And, I still feel like the jury is still out on some of this pitching development stuff. I think there have been individual success stories. There are promising signs for the future. I mean, you've seen a lot more of Cade Horton than I have, but like, whatever progress has happened, it wasn't good enough to make the playoffs.
Right. Yeah, look, I'll tell you, it'd be excited about Cade Horton. I mean, a legitimate front end guy. He's honestly, I think he's one of the best that they've had in my time. Cashner and throw him in there, and Kyle Hendricks. They've had a few, not a lot, but they've had a few. And this guy, he stacks up there. He's got just an amazing slider that he can throw wherever he wants. He's a difference maker. Fastball, he knows how to pitch. He's got a little bit of that meanness you like. so I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, but I don't know that he's ready right now. I think he's got to be a little bit more accurate, maybe just sand the edges. I'd love to see him use a changeup a little bit more, but he's great. I mean, he's a top end pitching prospect, and I think you have to have those in this day and age. The game plan used to be we'll draft and develop these position players, and then we'll buy pitching. But the problem is there's just not a lot of pitching to buy.
Yeah, and that gets real expensive, right? I mean, we saw if you're constantly trading from your farm system and, signing multiple relievers every year, and, you still have to go do those big deals for a John Lester, Yu Darvish, and those both worked out, very well. But yeah, I think they're going to need some pitching to bubble up, because if we're assuming that the Cubs pick up Hendricks option, Stroman opts in, and Drew Smiley opts in, that's, off the top of my head, roughly like $45 million in, kind of pitching payroll commitments on top of Tyone, on top of Jordan Wicks and some of these Javier Assad. Several they have some layers there that I think will serve them very well next year. But if you had that guy who could come close to 200 innings, that would take the pressure off of everyone, obviously. And I just don't know if they'll go there when you're going to have to either re-sign Cody Bellinger or find someone to approximate his production. And even just doing that only gets you back towards a baseline of like, low 80s, mid 80s wins. I think they need, 2 impact hitters, or you saw, you've known Jeimer Candelario for a long time. I mean, when he was healthy and he was right,
he was good.
It was a real nice piece to have when you're, 30th out of 30 major league clubs in first base production. Like, to get a guy who's, above average can make a big difference, especially if he can bounce to third and switch hit and all those type of things. So I at this point, I don't know how star driven they will be, or if you could just kind of raise the floor at multiple positions. I do think that would go a long way too.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, because you also have the farm system, which I want to talk to you about. But let me go back to a couple topics that I want to get into. And first is, you mentioned Smiley and Stroman and Hendricks, and which one of those guys is going to be around, or all three of them. I think I was listening to Bruce Levine's show, and he kind of made a reference that maybe the Cubs weren't that happy or something like that with Stroman. I was trying to figure out like what he meant by that. I know Stroman got hurt. I think if you have, anything in your ribs, and he said it was hard to breathe. I mean, I think that him coming back really showed a lot of strength, but I'm not there on a day-to-day basis. What are your thoughts on Stroman, Hendricks in particular coming back? And, how's that relationship, you think, between the Cubs and Stroman?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I would say that when things were going well with Stroman, which has been, most of the prior season and, the first half of this season, that, I mean, the Cubs are a very player-centric organization. And so it's kind of like Stroman did his thing and knew what he needed to do to perform. And that was kind of it. And, the initial injury that I think he had a, legitimate hip condition. I think he said he got a cortisone shot for it, but that was also like a mental reset break. And then, going into the, final days of the season, we still had no answers for how this rib thing happened. And so I think it's a legitimate kind of injury, but a freak accident that there's not a whole lot of explanation for. So I think there was I think down the stretch, I think it was really hard to get to a place where each side could feel comfortable about how to use him. Like, he hadn't pitched out of the bullpen, I think, in like 9 years, and he hadn't pitched in a game in like 2 months. And the Cubs used him back-to-back days in Arizona against, a playoff team, a team they were competing directly against to try and make it to October. And so I don't know, that to me didn't seem like the greatest or most obvious idea. And, Stroman came in saying, I'll do whatever to help the team. And then he would also say, I'm one of the most elite starters in the game. So you know what he wanted to do. But he also wasn't totally stretched out either. And he had not been an effective pitcher in some time.
Right.
So I think it's reasonable to think that, one, the Cubs would probably rather use that $21 million elsewhere. Just to, how they operate. They think of upside and things like that.
Right.
Flexibility.
Yeah.
It's also reasonable to think that Stroman could have a very good year next year if he does, assuming he does opt in. Like, when he's been bright and healthy on the Cubs, he's been a very good pitcher. And I think, his teammates, the coaches, David Ross, the front office, they all kind of had an understanding of, Stroman's a veteran who knows what he wants to do, and you kind of empower the player. And that's worked for the most part. It just didn't down the stretch. And
right.
So I think that would be a major project this offseason of figuring out kind of what went wrong and how to get him back on track. And Kyle Hendricks, both Tom Ricketts and Jed Hoyer said they, want and expect him back next year. So I'm assuming whatever it is, 5 days after the World Series, they'll pick up his option. My understanding is that lowering the AAV of that, like, I know people talk about, do a multi-year deal. My understanding is already based off of, that multi-year contract extension. So his number in terms of the luxury tax is pretty low as is. And I think if you're Kyle Hendricks, you're totally good with another year at the only place you want to play. And then you'd have a full year on top of a 75% year to kind of negotiate off of. And if you're the Cubs, like, do you really want to make a long-term commitment in a guy who, that was coming off a serious injury and is maybe 33 or 34? He's up there. So I think you could see a series of one-year deals kind of moving forward. That would be my guess as of now, but we'll see.
Yeah, I love them. I know it's not. This isn't one of those. Yeah, right. This isn't one of those things.
I love you, man.
I love you, bro. You're the last guy from 2016, but we've seen the guy come up. He's the last guy. He'll do anything for the team. But I also see that the velocity's down, and for him, it's like he's still able to pitch around it. But maybe he figures out a way to get it back up to 90. If he got it 90, 91, he's all of a sudden becomes super effective again with his ability to do everything else. But just I'm a Cubs fan. The fan in me is like, please stay. Let's just retire a Cub. Let us have that guy that spent his whole career, won a World Series, and then tips his cap and walks away. But that might not be realistic.
Well, I think it's realistic to say that he was one of their better starting pitchers and most trusted pitchers this year. And he did show those flashes of kind of creeping back towards 90. I think there are certain matchups that are just bad. I guess the Braves are a bad matchup for everyone, but there's a reason they kind of maneuvered him around so that he wasn't pitching in Atlanta, but was pitching in Milwaukee. And I think he feels great. And I think he brings so much value to the other young pitchers and the clubhouse at large that you're always going to need pitching. You're always going to be worried about injuries. And the old saying of there's no such thing as a bad one-year deal certainly applies to Kyle Hendricks.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So we'll see what happens. $16 million club options. They get to decide, or they pay him $1.5 million to go away, or maybe they restructure his contract. Who knows?
There's so many 16.5.
Is it 16.5?
Yeah, because he got a some Cy Young love in like
Really? So he got an
2020,
extra 5.5? Well, good for him.
over the last several
I'm
years.
glad you're on here.
Yeah.
Let's adjust that back in the back somewhere. Hanging out with Patrick Mooney from The Athletic. You guys know him, beat writer for the Cubs, and one of the best out there in doing this. All right, let's talk Cody Bellinger. I'm going to tell you, as critical as I was about the Jamison Taillon contract, which I wasn't a big fan of, I thought this one had the potential to be just huge, and it was even better than I thought. I thought, well, you got a 1-year deal. You're paying a guy that used to be an MVP. We know he was injured. But he came in, and his game was so much better than I even anticipated. I thought, well, maybe he'll put up some good numbers, and you can trade him at the deadline and get something for him. What happened was Cubs fans, they fell in love with this guy because he plays the game the right way. You put him at first base, you put him in center field. He plays great defense, runs the bases hard. He is a tough out, lefty or righty. So now the problem is he had such a great season, although he was a little tired down the stretch, but I think that's something that you can say about a lot of players that the Cubs had. Everybody wants him back. But now I think his value is so high, and he's got this agent, a guy named Scott Boras, if you've ever heard of him before, but he can be very difficult to deal with unless you're ready to dish out a lot of years and a lot of money.
Well, yeah, but this was the plan all along. There was no way he wanted a multi-year deal coming off of being non-tendered by the Dodgers. There was zero interest, or it made no sense to try and do an in-season thing. And technically, I guess they still have an exclusive negotiating window, but there's no point in Bellinger going this far and having this much success to even entertain that idea. And if you're the Cubs, you're not going to just bid against yourself. And I think it will be fascinating to see how teams value Bellinger. Like, there aren't many center fielders out there who can bring it offensively. The Boras factor is real. Like, if he finds some owner, an example that's fresh in my mind is the Xander Bogaerts contract with the Padres last winter. I think that might have been 12 and 280. I mean, it's in that type of ballpark. Like, the Cubs have given no indications that they would ever entertain something like that in terms of years. At the same time, the Cubs have more information on Cody Bellinger than anyone else in terms of recent information. No other organization is going to have like more references in support of bringing back Bellinger than the Cubs. He loved playing at Wrigley Field. The Cubs complex is not far from his off-season home and where he grew up. The Cubs are going to be in this. I think it just comes down to, whether some owner out there just does something, irrational that we're not, that we would not have expected. And the Cubs don't operate that way. Tom Ricketts says that's a Jed decision, that he gets the resources. It's up to him to spend it how he sees fit. So Bellinger fit in a lot of meaningful ways. I got flashbacks to Theo Epstein's end of season press conference a couple of years ago saying like, our offense broke, or Joe Madden talking about a 2-strike approach, and just how, tough that offense could be to watch, even though there was lots of individual talent. Like, Bellinger brought a great swagger to the clubhouse. He is a great example in the batter's box of how to think through the game and play the game as it's presented to you. And for a guy in a contract year, he was very unselfish, moving back and forth between first base and center field. Now, that unselfishness will ultimately get him paid a lot more money than maybe he would have otherwise.
Right.
But, I think, I still think he probably signs somewhere else, but I think the Cubs will be in it until the last round of bidding.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too.
My gut feel, yeah.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too. But I respect Tom and Jed for not getting caught up in some of these really bad deals. You know, I mean, it's because there's teams. I mean, look, the highest paid guy on the Reds at one point last year was Ken Griffey Jr. I mean, you know, it's like there comes a point where you got to go, you know what? No, that's not going to work for us long term. But at the same time, you know, Cubs fans feel like the Cubs are a big market team and that they need to go out and spend. And I get that part of it too. But if they would have went out and spent on Chris Bryant and Javi Baez, think about where things would be right now, because it would be hard for those guys to get on the field with what, you know, they're just not having the success that they did have, you know, as much as we love them for winning the World Series. So there's almost a balance. I say this, like, if I could see the Cubs really paying for a guy like Juan Soto, that type of talent. You know, say the Padres are like, you know what, we got all these guys. You talk about Bogarts, the contract. They signed all these guys to these huge contracts. It hasn't worked. You know, maybe they want to kind of infuse some talent back. I mean, they traded for Yu Darvish, one of their best players, in Owen Casey, who's now one of the best Cubs minor leaguers. But I could see a Juan Soto type guy being someone that the Cubs say, hey, you know what? The guy's in his mid-20s. We'll give him 10 years, right? But maybe that's Bellinger too. I mean, it's not like Bellinger's a fossil or anything. I mean, he is 28, right? Is he 28? Yes. So, I mean, the guy, you know, but I just have this feeling that they could just absolutely blow us away with a Juan Soto type trade if that became available, with the minor league prospects that they had. And also something that I want to get into with you too is I almost feel like they may be better off if David Ross is the manager making deals like this and bringing in guys that are veterans, because I felt like it was a tough environment for the young players. But you're there every day and you may have a different take on that.
Yeah, I would say that David Ross, I think, did a great job with Christopher Morel. I think Javier Assad had a great deal. Like, I never understood the uproar about Alexander Canario not playing. Like, the guy didn't play until like August. He had never played in the big leagues before. The Cubs farm system, while better than it had been in recent years, did not really bring it in terms of whether you're talking about Matt Mervis earlier in the year or Pedro Armstrong later in the year. Like, unless Alexander Canario could like pitch the 9th inning or the 8th inning, like I don't really see the huge difference maker here. Like, we're gonna sit Seiya Suzuki, who was one of the best hitters in baseball the last 2 months of the year. I mean, Ian Happ was not one of the hitters who struggled down the stretch. And so, I mean, I think the Cubs would say that, you know, David Ross might be better with young players than Joe Madden. Like that's
wow.
That's impossible to quantify. But in terms of like an overall kind of the clubhouse that they want running at Wrigley Field right now, they believe that David Ross is ideally suited for that. And so I think too, some of the stuff like, I mean, David Ross, so many of his pre and post game things are recorded on cameras. There's a camera in his face. And I think that doesn't really do justice to all the dimensions of how all the things he's thinking about at once. So if he says, you know, we're going to go with the guys that brought us here, like that's the small quote that's clipped, but that doesn't really take into account, you know, how open he is to suggestions and feedback, and how, you know, he solicits opinions in the clubhouse and takes in information. And so to one of your earlier points, I mean, the Cubs have had said no a lot over the years. So it's like, yeah, you can keep drawing that line of we think that doesn't make sense or that's totally irrational. Then you can say that, you just won't get the player. And so if you're not going to do, we'll see if like 10-year deals become like the norm as a way to spread out money in terms of accounting for the CBT. We'll see, if other teams are like suspicious of Bellinger because the Dodgers non-tendered him, because he hadn't been good for years, and all of a sudden is really good with the Cubs. I think the Cubs have enough information to feel good about their evaluation of what he can be going forward. I think, there are probably 20 plus teams out there that can't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a large group of teams that just won't deal with Boris on a player of his caliber. And so I'm with you, though, on the trade idea. I would say Pete Crow Armstrong and Cade Horton are probably untouchable. But after that, I just don't see it. I don't think the Cubs are going to get necessarily burned by trading a guy on the earlier side rather than waiting for him to get to Wrigley Field and face plant. Because I this farm system coming in this year, what was I guess kind of the general consensus was a lot of depth, much improved, but where are the stars? And so if you can get that guy, you may have to, if you're not willing to pay at the top of the free agent market. I mean, even Dansby Swanson, an enormous amount of money outside their comfort zone, but still kind of pales in comparison to the other big three shortstops from last offseason. I guess Correa sort of got towards the same neighborhood, but that was after failing two physicals. Right. So,
yeah, look, I'm with you on Dansby. I mean, it's more than just the stats. You gotta like everything about the guy. But yeah, in the farm system, I'm with you. I mean, it's not like you got 4 mega stars with Chris Bryant, the core 4, Chris Bryant and Schwarber, Baez, and I guess it would be Addison Russell, maybe the other guy, but a lot of good players. And some of these guys are going to end up being great big leaguers as well. It's just a question. And I thought that Jed Hoyer, who I like Jed a lot, honestly. I like that he's rebuilding the organization, which is something that he really needed to do. People kind of underestimate how bad it was when Theo left, but he's done an awesome job of bringing back, big league ready talent. I mean, maybe they're not, Luke Little got to the big leagues and I'm like, okay, Luke's great when he's on. He's not great when he's off, but they needed him and he got up there, but eventually he's going to be, I think eventually he's got potential to be just an enormous piece. Right. And I thought Jed made a great point at his press conference when he's like, it's tough to be contending and then break in a guy from the minor leagues. And I get that. And I'm going to say that because that's almost the defense of David Ross. I mean, and I guess it should be. You got to look at both ends, both sides of the coin. And that's one side of the coin too, is that makes it difficult.
I mean, the Cubs have had 2.5 years to break in guys, though. I mean, go from the trade deadline sell-off of 2021. I mean, the 2022 season was a total write-off in terms of, let's just see what we have. And they found out that Justin Steele is a Cy Young Award type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, some of the, what do we have, or, what could we give up? At this time last year, the Cubs probably should have traded Keegan Thompson. Some of these guys just come and go. And I think that is something that they're going to have to discuss internally as well, of Hayden Wisniewski looked awesome last September. He looked awesome in spring training. He came from the Yankees, a really sharp pitching development system. He had existing relationships with people in the Cubs pitching infrastructure. And he never really got locked in or found a role. I mean, Keegan Thompson bounced up and down. Obviously, Brandon Hughes was hurt. I think that one's more of an injury thing. But it's hard to find those staples. And I don't think it'd be the worst thing if the Cubs became a little more transactional with some of that stuff instead of just sitting around waiting for talent to grow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we've talked here for over 35 minutes, and it's been fun. But I know I got to let you go. So my last question is really just your thoughts on where do you think the Cubs are moving forward? I mean, how comfortable are you with where they are right now and where they're heading?
Are they going to ask me about the Ravens? No, I think
we can talk Ravens. Like the Ravens, I feel like the Ravens are a playoff team.
I don't know if the Cubs are a playoff team. I think there's a lot of progress. I think there was a lot of valuable information gained. I think the Cubs exceed the professional baseline of some of the incompetence that we've seen in the city's other professional sports franchises.
I know.
But that's a very low bar because the Cubs want to be like,
what
the Patriots were, the San Antonio Spurs were,
right?
Manchester United. Like they're not there. And I think it's going to take a lot of money this offseason. I think it will take, wouldn't be shocked to see a big trade. But mostly, I think the Cubs struck the right tone of this season was not a success. It all starts over again next year. And, I think 2024 was the year that they had circled. Like from the moment they traded you Darvish, it was like 2024 is probably the year we're going to be a legit playoff team.
Right.
And now this year they kind of teased people with that and flirted with the playoffs and fell short. But 2024 is going to be a massive prove it year for David Ross, for Jed Hoyer, for a lot of these players who are going to have to wear that September collapse until the real games start again.
Yeah, I agree with you. Where can people find your work at? What are you doing right now? I know you're always busy. So
I'm always check out our stuff on The Athletic. My colleague Sahadev Sharma and I and Ken Rosenthal and our national staff. We've got a ton of content rolling through the playoffs. Whether or not the Cubs are in the playoffs, we still write. Still got some Cubs stories going. So thank you for the plug and thank you for having me on. Always enjoy talking with you, Mick.
I wish you were here to have a beer with me.
Yeah, it's a little early, but yeah, definitely.
We don't care.
We got to do that soon.
He's Patrick Mooney with The Athletic. I'm Mick Gillispie, Cubs Baseball Channel. Guys, appreciate you being here. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Join our roster.